Hey, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jared Fuller, and this is my podcast about design criticism and practice. This week on the podcast, I am talking to Paola Antonelli. Paola, of course, is the Senior Curator of Architecture and Design, as well as the Director of R&D at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, where she's worked to expand the traditionally held definitions of design by making some kind of bold acquisitions like the @ sign and the original emoji set. She's written and edited for publications like Domus, Metropolis, and Harper's Bazaar, and previously taught at the University of California and in Harvard's Graduate School of Design. And I'm pretty sure she is the first person I've interviewed for the podcast who was also interviewed by Stephen Colbert on the Colbert Report. Back in August, I visited Paola at her office in MoMA to talk about how she thinks about her work, especially around curating design exhibitions for general audiences, expanding the definitions of design, and why she feels her goal is to make everyone a type of design critic. We also talk about her own background and early realization that design was this methodology that could be applied to different fields and platforms, the problems with contemporary design education, and the challenges facing designers as design gains more and more cultural currency. Paola obviously is incredibly smart and thoughtful, and I really enjoyed this truly wide-ranging conversation. We spoke in the middle of preparation for her current exhibition, Items is Fashion Modern, which just went up at MoMA, so I can't express how much I appreciate her taking time out of that to talk to me about all of these things that I'm interested in. So I am truly honored and excited to share this wonderful conversation with Paola Antonelli. I was thinking about this today and kind of what I wanted to talk to you about, and the kind of genesis of this podcast is this intersection between kind of practice and criticism, or kind of practice and thinking about these things. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is that you originally studied architecture, right? And so I thought this was a good way to kind of set up this conversation. When you were in school studying architecture, did you think you were going to be a practicing architect?
Not really, but there's something to be said about architecture in Milan at that time, because it was still mass university, and it was the university where people that didn't know what to do in life would go to. So there were two schools. One was law, and the other was architecture, which were the two schools where people that didn't really have a clue would go.
Yeah.
And I had gone for 2 years to economics school, and I really didn't fit there, and I didn't have the brains for it. So I left and went to architecture exactly because I was like, I want to get the hell out of economics. Yeah. So when I started, I had no clue whatsoever. It was almost like a reaction to get away from economics.
Okay.
And then I tried working as an architect towards the end for 6 months, but it was not my thing.
Okay. So did you, going into that program or switching from economics to architecture, I don't know how to ask this without it sounding kind of weird, but how aware of what architecture was or what an architect did were you? Like when you, at the end, when you were starting to practice it and you realized it wasn't for you, was that a surprise?
No, I was aware of what an architect was. I was also aware that by going to architecture school, I could be a fashion designer, a furniture designer, a graphic designer, or a chef. Also, I forgot to tell you, there was Mass University, which meant I paid $200 a year.
Oh,
and there was no admission exam. So I'm talking about, I think that it's a very different kind of university.
Yeah.
And it has its pros and its cons. I think that the American system is very, very interesting, and the Italian system is very interesting too. In Italy, you feel like the only thing that you're wasting is time. You don't waste money. You don't waste, because you just test different things. In the United States, you go into school getting indebted. So you don't have any time to lose, and you don't have that much time for speculation.
Yeah.
You immediately want to make money as
Right.
soon as you get out because you have to pay school students' debt. So it is two very different systems.
Yeah. That's
And
interesting.
I'm very glad that I went to the Italian school because it's more attuned to my way of thinking. I don't think that I would be here if I had had to decide at the inception what I wanted to be.
So,
or if I had to make money as soon as I got out.
Right. How did that kind of transition then happen after kind of finishing that program and then starting to work? And you were kind of curating right from the beginning, or kind of, teaching and things like that pretty much right away, right?
I was, yeah. Milan gives you many more opportunities to do. Here in New York, there's only big architecture and design shows.
Right.
I mean, there's a few small ones, but usually the stages are already of the first degree, so you need to fight to get there. In Milan, you have many different opportunities in smaller exhibition spaces, galleries, the Salone del Mobile. So there were many opportunities.
Okay.
And also, I was lucky because I was curating. I was a gopher. I was not really curating, but then they also hired me. They also hired me at Domus. I was able always to have these kind of hybrid positions that were inside the editorial office, but also outside.
I guess that's kind of starting to get at the question that I'm kind of having some trouble articulating, is that even though I'm interested in that, kind of, even though you realized very quickly that you maybe did not want to be an architect, that it seems like the themes or the ideas around architecture and design were something that were very interesting to you, even if you weren't going to be a practitioner?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, when you went to school at that time, now it's changed, but everybody was together. So we were 15,000 students in architecture. Oh, wow. And amongst the teachers, you had bona fide architects, theoretical architects, historians, and philosophers. And then you had furniture designers. Castiglioni was there. Zaluso was there. So really the idea, and also there was no way to do anything practical because there was no room to have labs and to have tables and workshops. That's it. It was all theoretical. So when you learn theory of architecture and design from people that are practitioners like Castiglioni, all of a sudden you realize that design is a methodology and a creative endeavor that can be applied to different platforms and different scales. So I never felt that I had to become an architect. I knew from the start I could be a journalist. And I could be a filmmaker. I mean, it was really about the creative process, the constructive, targeted creative process.
So this was not something that I was planning on asking you, but this raises a question. Do you see your work now or your entire career as a design activity?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Even if you don't call yourself a practitioner?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I always feel that also essays and exhibitions and they are design feats of some sort.
I'm curious how that kind of mindset or that way of thinking about design influences the actual work that you're doing and the act of curating an exhibition where you are selecting objects, I guess. When you think about design as something much bigger than that, how do those things come together? Do you know what I'm?
No, tell me again.
I'm struggling to articulate this. I think something that's very interesting to me about you and your work is that often a curator is seen as someone who's kind of selecting objects and putting them together. But the way you just kind of articulated the design process, or the way you see design, the object is just a byproduct of some kind of larger investigation or idea. How does that way of thinking about design influence, kind of collecting of objects?
I don't think that there's any curator that just collects objects. I think that every curator invests objects with more meaning than what you see. Whether it is a monographic show for for a designer, as far as I'm concerned, the object are thresholds. It's true, windows into different
Right.
universes. But I always have also a thesis that the object supported in a way. So,
Yeah, that's what I was kind of.
yeah, yeah. So that happens all the time. Of course, when you are talking about the collection of the museum, when you do exhibitions,
Yeah.
then you can play that way. You have
Right.
a thesis, you choose the objects. When it's the collection, every object has to stand on its own.
Yeah.
So it's a little more, the selection is tougher in a way.
Right.
And that's when you really have to find the balance. And since this is an art museum, form is still very important.
Right.
And I like form, so I don't have any fear of it.
I guess this kind of raises questions that I have about. I don't want to say that some of your acquisitions have been some of the thing, I'm thinking about like the @ sign, for example, was kind of, I don't want to say controversial, but it raised a lot of questions.
And that's really the point,
right?
Yeah. That's why the @ sign is a great way to think about what design is, what museums do, what curator's role is, what is an acquisition, what is the public domain, who owns things when they are immaterial. It's the beauty of it, right? And can modern be something that existed in the Middle Ages and today? So that's why I love so much the @ sign. More than controversial, it's deep. It's like intense. It's poignant, right? And I was very happy. I'm very proud of that anointment, not even an acquisition. I don't even remember how it happened. People ask me, and I really don't remember. I mean, it's been growing. I mean, it took a while because also the first intuition had then to be buttressed by reality. So I had to learn more about the history.
Right.
But to this day, it condenses so much.
Do you feel? I think the @ sign especially is a good example of this, but I'm also thinking of things like the original emoji set, or video games, or even pieces of code. Do you feel a responsibility? And that's kind of a big word, but I don't know. I guess that's right. Do you feel a responsibility to widen or change the general public's perception of what design is?
Yeah, of course. No, absolutely. There's a section of my work that is about the R&D department here at MoMA, and it's about talking about issues that relate to the world, and the museums can help. We did a series about the object. And it's the idea of object that has changed.
Right.
The fact that it's not necessarily physical, it can be digital. So definitely it's about explaining to people that objects are not just the microphone, the car, the piece of furniture, that interfaces are objects that are designed, that, well, as far as I'm concerned, I proposed this show on scent design, and then it didn't go. But scent is also a form of design, in my opinion. Anything that involves at least one of the senses is a form of design. Now, when it comes to music, it's too complex, so I don't even go there. But you could say that. You know?
Something that's very interesting to me as both a design practitioner and then also someone who spends a lot of time talking to people about design and writing about design is that so much of the contemporary kind of design discourse often is very superficial, and especially in graphic design, I use this example a lot. If a company redesigns their logo, a lot of the discussion is about how the typeface has changed, or the color has changed, or the kerning is a little bit different, without ever kind of going to deeper questions about, maybe why that company had to redesign their logo, or what were the cultural conditions that led to that, or what is the world that this, object is going into. How do you think about that type of, discourse or discussion around whether it be a show or, an exhibition, or kind of individual objects or things in the collection, and kind of the education point of that, and not looking at them as something that you just kind of look at and walk away, but as this kind of deeper thing.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about the superficial
Yeah.
versus the depth.
Yeah.
It's very hard to make people understand in words simply
Yeah.
the importance of the choice of a font, for instance.
Right.
You kind of have to show it to them.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that it's very powerful to take a piece of text written by somebody and to show the same piece in Avenir versus Dean,
Right.
and that when they see it, they get it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like describing wine with words. You know what I'm saying?
Right,
As opposed to letting
yeah.
it be tasted. Sometimes there's
Yeah.
something ineffable, especially about graphic design, and especially about fonts.
Yeah.
Fonts are the most complex,
Yeah.
difficult thing to choose, to talk about, to
Mm-hmm.
curate. It's tough.
Yeah.
And but there's nothing better than just showing.
How do you something that's very interesting to me and something I think about a lot is this idea of audience and kind of who design writing is being written for, or a design exhibition, who is kind of coming through that, or who will be encountering that. And a lot of the people that I've talked to for this podcast have been people that are often writing to other designers. It's kind of a
Mm-hmm.
discourse for the profession. And something that, you in an art museum have a very different audience, I imagine. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm even thinking like you're the first person that I've talked to that was on the Colbert Report, which is a very different audience. How do you think about talking about these types of things to people that probably have or might not have any background knowledge, or maybe didn't even know that they were interested in this?
See, that's the point. Nobody has no knowledge of design. You know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
just like,
Okay. Yeah.
ultimately, the people that come to the museum are the ones that designers work for, in most cases. You know what I'm saying? It's like, not in
Yeah.
all cases, but like Pac-Man was designed for everyone. The
Right.
ad sign, the post-it note. I mean, there are some really rarefied chairs that are in the collection, but nobody doesn't know anything about design. They just don't have it formulated in the way
Oh,
that
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So very often when people used to come to the galleries of design when we had them, because now they're closed, you would see these like people of all ages going around and pointing at things in the vitrine saying, I used to have that toaster,
Right.
I used to have that record player.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the beauty of it. All of a sudden you see your life in the museum. And it's a beautiful moment because you realize that the museum is about you. You always maybe thought that the museum was about Van Gogh or Matisse, this kind of larger-than-life geniuses that donated, that regaled the world with these masterpieces. And all of a sudden, your life is in a vitrine in a museum. The Kikkoman soy sauce is on a pedestal. And all of a sudden, you're like, what?
Yeah.
Or there's this beautiful visualization design that we have in the collection that is about the certain blocks in inner cities in the United States where the government, whether federal or local, spends more than $1 million a year to keep people either in halfway houses or in prison. And it's a beautiful visualization, and there would be this program that MoMA would have with inner city kids, and they would come and see their own story on the wall. I mean, that's powerful.
Yeah.
You know, when it's about you.
And how does that change? Does that change at all how you think about these things?
Me?
Yeah, as somebody who is kind of, it is your job, and then, kind of seeing people that didn't know that was maybe design.
It doesn't change it. It reinforces it, and it moves me, and it makes me really proud. I remember when we acquired Minecraft and we put it in the galleries, and you would see the little kids dragging the parents towards the wall. It's not something you see that often in museums. It makes me really happy. Just like, I don't believe, are you happy? But that makes me happy.
Right.
Yeah.
How... I think all of these are really good examples of how design, and I'm using that word loosely here, has changed culturally. And I think you've written or talked about this before and I mean, we were even talking about just earlier in this conversation about, scent, or, people are talking about kind of designing, redesigning DNA, or design has just become this word that means so many different things. Does that change how you do your work, or kind of structure exhibitions or something?
Not really, because it's as if I were an art curator. I mean, you can't really follow definitions of art every time they pop up. You just do your thing. You have your own internal definition for working purposes and for preaching purposes, and then you go with it. So I can't really get bothered. I mean, when people ask me about design thinking, I tell them, okay, make sure you understand it's not design, and they're like, what?
Right.
It's not, it's just method. So I need to clarify, or when they show me some kind of artist's chair that hardly stands up and costs $50,000, I'm like, no, that's pretty bad. If it's design, it's bad.
Right. How do you? This might, I don't mean to be reductive in this question, but how do you draw those lines around that?
It's not very easy. You mean around the chair in particular?
Yeah.
Well,
you're like,
the chair is
this
easy.
is not.
No, the chair is easy. The chair is quite easy because you can tell quite soon enough if it's self-expression and like an artist descending towards design, or if it's real design.
Right.
The chair you can tell.
How has, this is coming back to kind of my question before, but I'm interested in how, this is a two-part question, and you can kind of answer it. You can answer either part, or whatever part is interesting to you. But I'm interested in how the kind of cultural awareness of design, which we were kind of talking about earlier, that kind of everybody does kind of have some knowledge of design. Has that changed over the course of your career? And then the second part is kind of design as a profession. Has the way the profession talked about their work changed kind of over the course of your career?
So the understanding of design that people have varies a lot on location. In Milan, everybody, like, it's normal.
Yeah.
But every place has different strengths. Like in Milan, good design is normal, not because people are more sophisticated, but because if you need a coffee pot or you need a trivet, you go downstairs and you cross the street to a crummy little store where you find the bialetti, because that's the cheapest and it's just well designed. I mean, so good design is normal and not more expensive than bad design. People talk about it, people really love it, people are trained to recognizing if aluminum is cast or it's extruded. You know what I'm saying? It's just a different culture, which is what we don't have is contemporary art. And you come here instead, there's this habit with contemporary art. So in Milan, design, the awareness of design and the understanding is always alive. Same thing in some parts of Germany, same things in some parts of Spain. You could say the same about some parts of England. So it really is localized, right?
Yeah.
I've seen it change in New York City in interesting ways and around the United States. I think that Apple did a lot,
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
It's especially, since the iPod, but even before, even from the iMac. I think that Apple needs to be credited with that, even though I'm not. I mean, I don't think that everything they do is golden, but they need to be credited with like making people more demanding. I don't like to say consumer. You'll notice that I don't say it because I would like to eliminate that word from our lexicon. But people have understood that good design matters at all levels, both as people that buy the products and as companies. You come from Warby Parker, so you know exactly how design can be important. But see, Neil and all the people from Warby come after Apple. They could have happened even before, and they did happen before, even in the United States, but they were lost. So I would say the US had that culture of design in companies like Cummins Engines, for instance, or in companies like IBM when Albert Watson Jr. was really admiring Adriano Olivetti. So it's interesting. There are these companies that existed also before, but I have to say that Apple really gave a boost to contemporary company making in terms of design.
And what's interesting to me about Apple and even IBM, I think, is that design was this thing that was so integral to their business. It wasn't, kind of just decoration at the end to make things look better. It was very, much ingrained in the whole process, in everything.
Absolutely. And in a way, it was much more than just putting out good products or pretty products. It was about teaching corporations that design should be in the executive suite.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
So after Jobs, it happened even before. I mean, and once again, if I go back to Olivetti, or if I go back to IBM or Herman Miller, I mean, these had designers that were really close to the CEOs, but it had been lost. And I have to say that Jobs really gave this push to the idea again. And for a while, there were companies, even big companies, P&G or GE, etc. They had designers very close to the executive suite.
Something that is very interesting to me, or something that I think about a lot that's very related to this, is that as design has kind of gotten that type of notoriety, I guess, or it has risen, where there's C-level designers in big corporations, that there's a certain responsibility that comes with that in kind of putting out work that is I don't know, not kind of, thinking about sustainability and
not
consumerism.
Always.
And
not always. You wish.
Yeah.
But,
do you consider things like that when you're acquiring a piece or putting on a show?
I always do. Okay. Like it's not like every object has to be perfectly sustainable, because otherwise it would be impossible. But I look at it, and if there's no responsibility towards the environment, there needs to be a trade-off. Something else must be stunning. You know what I'm saying?
Okay,
so there are some items, like for instance, we acquired into the collection 2 years ago one of the bricks that came from David Benjamin's The Living, the tower that was built on MoMA PS1.
Yeah.
So in that particular case, the object has a beauty that comes from the fact that it's made of corn stalk and mycelium, right?
Right.
It's not a pretty object unto itself.
Right.
So its importance and its beauty, to me, comes exactly from that.
Yeah.
In other cases, sustainability is not even an issue, because maybe the goal of the object is different. Maybe the goal is to demonstrate a particular 3D printing process. The resin is not biodegradable.
Yeah.
So you need to be really mindful of what you're looking at any time.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of leading into what my question was, and this is a big question, so I understand if this is going to be hard to answer, but we're kind of talking at a certain theoretical level, and we're occasionally pointing to specific examples, but we're talking a lot about kind of good design or bad design, how you even can define that.
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, good design is a concept with a capital G that goes back to the history of the museum and to the history of modernism. And when you leave, you'll see by the elevator there's a little picture that says good design is in characters from the 1940s.
Yeah.
It's hard to really define what good design is anymore. In a way, good is a little bit of a synonym, or very attuned to the idea of modern. So it's something that is constructive, that pushes the world slightly forward, that has a certain honesty. You can still see the idea of the designer in it.
Yeah.
And it really tries to add something to the world. That's, to me, really the good part of it. So adding something to the world doesn't mean being so pragmatic as to only add something good. Even I always use as an example the Tamagotchi. It's like there's nothing more useless.
Yeah.
But I think it added something to our evolution as human beings. Maybe a very small thing. I mean, there's more important things than the Tamagotchi, but I would be sad if it hadn't existed.
Right. That's interesting. And that's something I think about coming from the point of a critic. And would you consider your work a kind of critical activity, or do you consider yourself a critic? A design critic?
I have a critical stance, yes. Mm-hmm.
Does that, I mean, that's something I always think about, is how you critique a piece of design or design, as an object or an artifact or as an idea, when there's all these trade-offs. Is it aesthetically or formally, or is it kind of
It depends on the
culturally?
object. It's very contextual. And truly, what I would like to do is to make everybody into critics. It's like
Yeah,
that's what
yeah.
I'm trying to help people sharpen their own tools. When you're
Mm.
looking at diamond earrings,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're gonna have a different critical stance than when you're looking at, a biodegradable brick or
Right.
or
Right.
an umbrella.
Right.
So you really need to change yourself. You cannot be so dogmatic and inflexible as to always be the same critic in front of everything.
Right. Can you talk more? I want to come back to that in a second, but you said something that was interesting to me. Could you talk more about wanting to make everyone a critic?
Yeah, I think that my job is not really telling people what things are like or what design is, but rather is to expose people to enough good or contentious example of design so that they can develop their own critical tools in order to reject, in order to demand, in order to accept, in order to celebrate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just think that more awareness of the whole life cycle of objects, about the consequence, more awareness of the consequences of buying something that is not biodegradable, that is not disposable, that is disposable.
Yeah.
Understanding that sometimes investing more money in a more durable object is meaningful. There's so many different things, but I would just like people to take objects not anymore on their face value, but have the pleasure, just experience the pleasure of knowing what's behind, before, and after an object.
And it's so often talked about as good or bad, or I like it or I don't like it. And so you're kind of saying, there's all this other.
Yeah, you can still say I like it, so long as I like it means all these different things. And just like people have learned what a director of photography does. They have learned what a production designer does.
Mm-hmm.
They know what mixing tracks means. I would like them to understand to get to the same level of understanding about design. It's not about being able to do the design or being able to make a movie, but it's being able to appreciate the different components.
Right. How open are you, or how how much do you let your point of view on these objects, or when you're, or let's not even leave it at objects, when you're curating an exhibition, how much of your opinion or your thoughts on that exhibition come through, or do you
100%.
kind of? Okay.
No, I don't. I think it's people that pretend to be objective in journalism and in curation are lying. I mean, you can be channeling another person's subjectivity when you do a monographic show of a living artist. But the moment you do a thematic show, it's your opinion.
So how do you kind of put yourself into this while also leaving it up to the viewer to make their own conclusions?
Very humbly, you say, this is my take.
Yeah.
Make your own. Like the next exhibition that I'm working on is a list of 111 garments that had a strong impact on the world in the past century. But it's my list.
Right.
And I bet you that a woman or a man, white man, Western, we probably would overlap 80%. And then the other 20% would be specific to you. Maybe it would be swayed more towards your gender, whatever. But if you make somebody from Johannesburg made the same list, it would be different. But the moment you make a list, people want to make their own. So very simply, even just that, I say, that's me. This is my assistant. This is the research assistant. See, another white woman from Europe. This is a Jewish woman from New York. So this is our list.
Yeah.
Make your own.
Interesting. I have just a couple kind of quick questions. These are kind of questions that I ask kind of everyone to wrap it up. I'm interested in what you think the design profession at large, what are the issues, topics, kind of considerations that designers should be thinking about, writing about, talking about?
So interesting. I think that one of the biggest issues is the education issue. because I do believe that design schools are too expensive,
Yeah,
and therefore students are not feeling free to experiment. I mean, they're not artists. They shouldn't be completely expressing themselves, but still, there should be a little more of a sense that one can take the liberty to just try, just try things. So that's to me a big issue. Other issue is the system, the recruitment system, because it favors a certain type of designer that can go work in studios and in corporations. So there's the headhunting system that completely discounts designers that have been formed in schools like the European ones, like say Eindhoven or Geneva, etc. And ultimately, that's to the detriment of companies. You know, so it filters out everything that cannot be classified in an easy way.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting.
I think that education and then porosity is a big issue. Those are the negative ones. The positive ones is that more and more, slowly but surely, there are designers that are entering positions that are not typical of designers. There's more venture capital firms that are including designers. There's governments that have IT positions, and sometimes they have also heads of design positions. So I see that the world is coming to terms with the importance of design in general culture, but there's still ways to go.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious what your, you're somebody who kind of has, my interpretation of your job at least, is someone who kind of has to be aware of kind of what's going on in the design world, but also the world at large, but then also kind of well-versed in the history and kind of theory around these things. I'm very curious what your kind of media diet is like. Like, how are you consuming all of this stuff and staying up to date?
It's super chaotic. These days, I'm not doing much. It's basically New York Times, but but otherwise it is tweets and Instagrams and newsletters and friends, and there are some design publications that I look at most, the usual Zines or Design Booms, and but otherwise it's very much omnivorous. Anything that comes my way.
Are you making connections in the moment, or does do you start working on a show and then you kind of go back and look at all those things you collected, or are you kind of seeing things like, oh, I'm filing this away?
Both, yeah.
Okay.
I use Pinboard a lot.
Okay, nice. So it's all right. It's always interesting. Someone who is operating at a kind of much faster level than I am, just kind of does it the same way.
We all do it in the same way, I gotta tell you. I don't think it is.
Okay, that's good to know. My last question for you, this hopefully is a very kind of easy, quick one. I'm curious kind of who are the people, whether it's writers, critics, curators, designers, who have really influenced how you think about what you do or influenced your career?
Well, I would say Bernard Rudowski really did. I mean, this whole exhibition that I'm working on is kind of named after his show, Our Clothes Modern, and his work has always been really very important to me. Another person that I revere is Susan Sontag, the continuous critical stance, but also generosity and love for human beings is something really to be cherished. I'm trying to think of which other. Stanley Kubrick.
Oh, nice.
It's like a revere Stanley Kubrick because he was always making the same movie, but it never looked the same, and he had this amazing attention for detail and real vision and the ability to carry it through with productions that were extremely complicated. I'm trying to think amongst journalists. There are so many people that I admire. It's almost difficult to say.
I just love putting Susan Sontag and Stanley Kubrick in the same. I think is great.
I know, I love them.
Thank you so much for doing this. This was so interesting to me. I know this was a busy, it's a busy season
Thank
for you.
Thank you for bearing with me, and I'm sorry that I was like a little bit all over the place.
No, this was great. This was so fun for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This episode was recorded on August 8th, 2017 in New York City. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and SoundCloud and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.